This week has been all about how individuals interpret and understand the world around them. This process of meaning making is at the core of symbolic interaction, and it plays a role in affect control theory as well. Affect control theory is ultimately a theory of social situations. By that, I mean that the theory applies to almost every situation in which two individuals from the same society are interacting. The theory explains how people maintain their understanding of a social situation. Understanding social situations is actually a really big coordination problem that society had to solve in order to function. Common understandings are important because we need to have a common understanding of a situation in order to act within it. If we can maintain our understanding of a situation, then we know what to expect in the immediate future. We have some idea of how we should act, and we have some idea of how others are going to act. Imagine what society would be like if we never knew how others were going to behave in a situation, or if we never knew how we should act. Obviously, this state of affairs would be unworkable. If you gave your friend a beer and he was just as likely to say thank you as he was to run away screaming, how could you possibly maintain that relationship? If you have no idea how to relate to anyone around you, how could society at large function? Affect control theory assumes the elements of a situation are always imbued with socially constructed meanings, and that those meanings create emotional reactions in the minds of those observing the situation play out. The emotional responses of the observer help them understand what is going on in the situation. Affect control theory also assumes that individuals want to align their impressions of a situation with the socially constructed meanings that are relevant for that situation. In effect, the theory assumes we all work to find common social ground. Let's look at the elements of the theory to see how this works. Affect control theory breaks down social situations into three important elements: actors, behaviors, and objects. Actors are the social individuals within the situation. Behaviors are the actions they take, and objects are the things that they direct their behavior towards. Actually, actors are a special class of object. Many social situations involve actors directing behavior to other actors. For instance, when you buy something at the grocery store, you're having an interaction with a cashier. You're directing behavior towards them. Each element of the situation has a symbolic label associated with it. This is a socially constructed understanding that allows an observer to make sense out of what is going on. Affect control theory can only be applied to situations that feature labeled elements. So, for example, if an observer is unaware of an element, they haven't labeled that element, and it will not influence their understanding of the situation. The simplest situations feature an actor acting towards an object. Take the following situation as an example. Child obeys mother. Here we have an actor, child, a socially directed behavior, obey, and an object, in this case another actor, mother. Each of these labeled elements have their own affective meaning. In the general sense, affect is a positive or negative feeling a person has about an object. Affective meaning, then, is a set of socially defined meanings that is evoked by a given label. In affect control theory, meanings are separated into three important dimensions: evaluation, the relative goodness or badness of a labeled object; potency, how powerful the labeled object is; and activity, how active the object is. So the affective meaning of any labeled actor, behavior, or object can be rated along these three dimensions. Collectively, we refer to these meanings as EPA ratings. Ratings across each dimension are typically measured on a -4 to +4 scale. For example, consider a child as a labeled actor. The socially defined understanding of child likely has a moderate rating for evaluation, a fairly low rating for potency, and a high level of activity. All elements of a situation can be given ratings in this way, and independent of one another, all elements of a situation have stable, culturally defined ratings that we call fundamental sentiments. Fundamental sentiments are transsituational, generalized responses to specific symbols in a culture. Fundamental sentiments are socially constructed affective meanings of the labeled elements of a situation. You could think of fundamental sentiments as context-free cultural understanding of labels. So I used the label child earlier, but I'm sure you could find specific children who do not meet the EPA ratings I gave. The fundamental sentiment for child would represent a common cultural understanding of the idea of child. All labeled elements of a situation have a fundamental sentiment. Theorists within affect control theory determine the fundamental sentiment of a label by having a large number of people from the same society rate the label along the E, P, and A dimensions. Our measure of the fundamental sentiment, then, is an average of these EPA ratings. Researchers collect these ratings in what they call dictionaries. Currently, we have dictionaries from the US, from Japan, and from Canada, to name a few sources. In addition to fundamental sentiments, the theory also relies on the concept of transient impressions. These are affective meanings that arise from the specific labels and contexts of a situation. Transient impressions vary from situation to situation. There is a fundamental sentiment for the label child, but an observer can form affective meaning for a specific child in a specific situation. That meaning is a transient impression. Importantly, transient impressions can differ from fundamental sentiments along EPA dimensions. Imagine you see a specific kid, and as you watch the kid, you see that he is bullying the kids around him. Where the fundamental sentiments for child suggest a good, low-power, moderately active actor, the kid that you see might be thought of as a bad, moderately powerful, moderately active actor. The transient impression you formed of the kid differs from our cultural understanding of what children are like. We can measure ratings for objects in a specific situation in the same way that we capture them for fundamental sentiments. That matters because those differences can alter our understanding of the situation and ultimately prompt new social behaviors. So how do fundamental sentiments and transient impressions help us understand the social situation? Well, affect control theory makes two important assumptions. First, the theory assumes that individuals respond affectively to every social situation they observe. And secondly, the theory assumes that individuals will try to maintain their understanding of a social situation. This idea is known as the affect control principle. Our understandings of a situation are influenced by both our society's fundamental sentiments for the labeled elements of the situation and by the transient impressions we form as the situation plays out. Differences between fundamental sentiments and transient impressions produce deflection. Deflection operates as an error signal for the person. It tells them that something is wrong with their understanding of the situation. So deflection is a theoretical concept that represents the difference between fundamental sentiments and transient impressions. If you've watched the video on identity theory, then this process should remind you of the perceptual control process model of identity theory. That's no accident. Both theories assume that humans cognitively try to maintain their understandings of situations. Affect control theory differs from identity theory, however, by assuming that affective meaning rather than a specific label is what is maintained. So the theory assumes that deflections will prompt behavior that minimize the difference between fundamental sentiments and our transient impressions of the situation. Remember, behaviors have EPA ratings too. So if we want to predict a likely behavior, all we need to do is find a behavior that has EPA ratings that minimize deflection. Take the child bullying their friend example. If we take the perspective of the friend, they understand the situation as their friend bullying them. That understanding creates deflection because transient sentiments formed by friend bullies friend are different from the relevant fundamental sentiments friend and bully. And so the friend behaves in a way that is likely to bring the situation back into line with their understanding. The theory also predicts what sort of emotions the actor is likely to experience in response to bullying. In other words, the theory predicts that they will have an emotional reaction caused by the deflection that they experience, and that they will take an action that attempts to realign their transient impressions with their fundamental sentiments. Actually, in this admittedly broad situation, affect control theory predicts a large number of possible behaviors. The friend might respond to the bullying, for example, by trying to joke with their friend, or they may respond to the bullying by fighting back. What the theory cares about is the affective meaning of the situation, not the specific behaviors. So long as the friend behaves in a way to reduce the deflection that they experience, the predictions of the theory are satisfied. No matter how they behave, their response needs to narrow the deflection that they experience, helping realign their transient impressions with their fundamental sentiments. But what if the deflection is too big? What if there is no possible behavior that could bring the transient impressions of the situation back into line with fundamental sentiments? In that situation, affect control theory predicts that the person will actually change their understanding of the situation. This is called the reconstruction principle. If there's no behavior that the friend can take to realign their transient impressions with their fundamental sentiments, they will begin to see the situation differently, relying on a new set of fundamental sentiments. Maybe the friend starts to think of the other kid as someone other than a friend. Alright, so that's the basics of affect control theory. It's a theory of situations that assumes we share a cultural understanding of the labeled elements of a situation, and that we try to maintain that understanding during interactions. Behaviors, according to affect control theory, are attempts to maintain our understanding of the situation. The reason that humans from the same society are able to coordinate behavior is because we're all operating from more or less the same fundamental sentiments. So, what does affect control theory apply to? Well, obviously the theory applies to any social interaction that has socially labeled elements. So long as these elements exist, the principles of affect control theory can be applied to make predictions about not only the behavior an individual is likely to take, but also their expected emotional response. Okay, so that's all for our week on symbolic interaction theories. Don't forget the quiz and the writing assignment that are due this week. As always, I will see you in the next video.